This will probably be part one of a two-part video, if not more. As you prepare for land judging, it's important for you to remember a few things. The first thing is to come up here and look at the contestant number. Each of you are going to be given a contestant number in which you need to make sure all of your cards, you'll get 5 cards, one for each hole, and then a card to also mark each of your field numbers and what you got on your field numbers on. This summary card is something for you to be able to keep so that you can compare what you put and what the judges actually put. It helps us to give a little bit more information on. Remember, you're going to be graded on land judging, and in order for that to happen, I'm going to need these green cards back. If I don't get the green cards, you're probably not going to get a very good grade. Okay, along with the contestant number, you need to put which field number it is. It's not going to do the judges any good, and they're not going to care who you are, what your last name is, or where you come from. They're going to go by the books. If it says field number 2, but it's actually field number 4, and you mark it as though it's field number 4, but you hand it in, they're going to put it in the field number 2 category. Therefore, you're probably going to get a whole bunch wrong. So make sure you get the correct field number written in right here. Also, make sure your name is there. Even though you're given a contestant number, make sure you put your name on the front of the cards. It's a lot easier for those that are keeping track of the score. Now, each hole, before you get to start judging, the judges will give you information. That information is going to be found in the field notes information right here. Remember, they're going to tell you the original topsoil thickness before any erosion happens. Even if there wasn't any erosion, they're going to give you what that original topsoil thickness was. That's important to figure out what the erosion factor is. They'll tell you the landscape position. Now, most soils in Nebraska are an upland soil. If it's an upland soil, we don't have to worry too much about the different factors of drainage, flooding, ponding. But it is important for you to know where you're at. Plus, it'll help you with the cheat sheet, which we'll go over later. If it is a depression, it is a depressed area in the land. Again, that's going to look a little like a bowl. With a bowl and water is going to be caught there. So therefore, you're going to have to look down at ponding. On ponding, if it's none or rare, you're not going to have to change your class, your land capability class, which will be found in part 2. If there's occasional ponding, you're going to have to knock it down to at least a class 3 land. Can't be any better because farmers aren't going to want to farm a ground that's occasionally ponded. If it's frequently ponded, it's going to be a class 4. If it's frequently ponded, again, it's a class 4. If it's very frequently ponded, it's either going to be a class 5 or a class 8. A class 5 is set aside strictly for areas that have a high water table. A class 8 is going to be for wildlife. If it's a pond that's almost always there, it's probably going to be a marsh area, or it could be an actual pond where fish are growing. Going back up to the landscaped position, if it's a stream terrace or a sandhill meadow, you don't have to worry too much about the rest of the notes that the judges will give you. However, if it is a floodplain, we need to know a little bit about the flooding of the plain. If there's none or rare flooding, you don't have to change your land capability class. If it's occasional flooding, it's going to knock it down a class. So for instance, if you get done with everything and it checks out as a land class 2, because it's occasionally flooded, it's actually going to be knocked down to land class 3. Likewise, if it's a land class 6 and it's occasionally flooded, it's going to be a land class 7. If it's frequently flooded, it'll be a land class 6. The drainage, EX means excessively drained, SE somewhat excessively drained, W is well drained, MW is moderately well drained, SP is somewhat poorly drained. So we're talking about the difference in the type of soil that we have. Excessively, somewhat excessively is going to be a sand soil. Whereas a somewhat poorly or a poorly, very poorly, that's going to have a lot of clay in it. If it's a very poorly drainage, you're going to move that to a land class 8. On pH, if the judges tell you that it is anywhere between a 6.5 and a 7.9, your pH is adequate. If they tell you that it's less than 6.4 or 6.4 or less, or 8 or more, you need to come up here and you need to mark box number 27 in the fertilizer and soil amendments because you're deficient and you need to get that pH figured out so that the nutrients are more available to the crop. For nitrogen, the judges are going to tell you simply, is it adequate or deficient? If they tell you it's deficient, you're going to come up here and mark box number 28. For phosphorus, if it is 60 plus, so if the number that they give you is 60 or above, you're going to say that that's adequate. If it's 59 or below, you're going to come up and mark box number 29. On potassium, the magic number is 250. If that number is 249 or less, you're going to go ahead and mark box 30 because then you're deficient. If you don't mark box 27, 28, 29, 30, you must mark box 31. There has to be at least one marking in box D in order for you to get your score. Hopefully it's the right box because if you can get those numbers memorized, it's pretty easy. Okay, going up to part 1 then. The judges have given you all the field notes information. Now it's time to figure out what your soil factors are. For depth of soil, you're looking for the A horizon and the B horizon. How deep is the whole hole? Remember that a deep, very deep soil, which is what we mostly have around central Nebraska, is going to be 40 plus inches. 40 plus inches is right about your rib cage area. A moderately deep soil is going to be 20 to 40 inches. A shallow soil is going to be 10 to 20 inches, so we're talking coming up to your knee. Very shallow is going to be 10 inches or less. For surface texture and permeability, remember that you have to ribbon the soil. In order to ribbon the soil, you're going to follow these guidelines here. You're going to start by placing approximately 1 ounce of soil in the palm of your hand and add water drop-wise and knead the soil to break down all aggregates. That's the rocks, the clumps of dirt that are stuck together, pulling out the twigs, the grass, the roots, all of that stuff needs to come out. Soil is at the proper consistency when it's plastic and moldable, like putty. If the soil remains in a ball when squeezed, you're going to move on. If it doesn't, is the soil too dry as you break it apart? Are there dry spaces in there? If yes, wet it down again. If no, is the soil too wet? Sometimes a clay soil is really easy to get wet and it gets stuck all over your hands. In that case, you're going to add dry soil to soak up some of that water. If it's not too wet, then you probably have a coarse texture soil. Think a sandbox. There are coarse textured soils around the river in Hamilton County, which is probably where we're going to be for this contest. Okay, coming back, the soil formed a ball. It stayed in a ball whenever it was squeezed. You're then going to place the ball of soil between your thumb and forefinger, gently pushing the soil with the thumb, squeezing it upward into a ribbon. You want to make sure that you're not pushing against your thumb, you're pushing up on the soil instead. That's going to affect the ribbon. The wetness of the dirt will also affect the ribbon, especially if it's clay or sand. It's going to create a longer ribbon than what it actually should be. It says form a ribbon to emerge and extend over the forefinger, breaking from its own weight. Make sure you have your hand underneath where the ribbon might fall so that you can catch it. You're going to want to make 3 to 4 ribbons with the soil so you can kind of take the average of how long that soil ribbon is to figure out the next step. If the soil does not form a ribbon, again, you're at coarse texture. If it does form a ribbon, does the soil make a weak ribbon less than 1 inch long before breaking? You're very well going to have something like this. There's a lot of medium texture soil in central Nebraska because of the amount of silt that we have here. If it does do that, it breaks off at 1 inch, you're going to excessively wet a small pinch of soil in the palm and rub with a forefinger, much like you see in the image to the left. Does the soil feel gritty? If yes, it's a moderately coarse texture. So on surface texture, you would mark moderately coarse. If it doesn't feel gritty, it feels smooth instead, it's going to be a medium texture. Going back up here, it made longer than a 1 inch ribbon, so you're going to move to the right. Does the soil make a medium ribbon 1 to 2.5 inches long before breaking? Yeah, it did, so it's going to be moderately fine. If it doesn't, move over to the right. Does the soil make a strong ribbon 2.5 inches long before breaking? Yep, that's going to be a fine textured soil. So then you come over here and you look at your surface texture. A fine texture is going to make a 2.5 inch ribbon or more. Moderately fine is going to be between a 1 to a 2.5 inch ribbon. A medium ribbon is going to be 1 inch and it's going to feel smooth. A moderately coarse is going to be 1 inch and it'll feel gritty. A coarse or very coarse texture will not make a ribbon. Permeability is how fast the water moves through the soil. Again, this affects crops a great deal because we want to know, are the nutrients going to be staying in that topsoil and subsoil, or is it going to move down? Is it going to leach into the water system? We want those nutrients to be available to the plants. Permeability is going to be dealing with the B horizon, which can also be called the subsoil or the control section. For very slow permeability, you're going to ribbon out a 2.5 inch ribbon. A slow permeability will also be a 2.5 inch ribbon. A very slow permeability will be found in an area where it's like a bowl in a depression area. The slow permeability is going to be found with clay. Obviously, the very slow will have a little bit more clay in it. A moderately slow permeability is going to have a 1 to a 2.5 inch ribbon. A moderate permeability is going to be a 1 inch smooth ribbon. A moderately rapid permeability will be a 1 inch gritty ribbon, and a rapid, very rapid, will not make a ribbon at all. Looking at slope. As we look at slope of the land, let me find, okay, this is how we determine slope. We look at the height of poles on a hillside. As I teach it, you stand away from the pole, knowing that our distance is 100 feet. You're going to stand away from the pole, and you're going to sight in the top pole. Remember, you're going to put your elbow in your gut, stick your elbow in your hand, and then with one of your fingers, you're going to sight in that where the pole meets the ground. You're then going to swing your hips straight across to figure out where it hits here. I find that to be a little bit easier rather than go from height of pole to height of pole, but it's kind of up to you on how you feel. Now remember that as you figure out slopes, there could be some instances where the landscape position only allows you a 50-foot span. If it's a 50-foot span, you need to double or multiply by 2 the amount of, that height in order for you to be able to get the correct figure.